Hey everyone, and welcome. In this explainer, we're going to dig into the amazing mechanics of a single heartbeat. We're talking about the entire mechanical and electrical symphony that keeps us going. So, let's get right into it.
You know, the whole thing happens in less than a second. It's this perfectly timed sequence of pressure changes, valve snaps, and muscle contractions. So, what exactly is packed into that tiny fraction of a second that's keeping you alive right now? Well, let's find out.
So, we can actually break this whole complex process down into 7 distinct sequential phases. And believe me, by the end of this, you'll know exactly what's happening in every single one. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the fundamental rules of the game. Then, we'll walk through a heartbeat in its 7 phases. After that, we'll look at the vital stats that measure heart performance, see how the body tunes its engine, and watch it all come together in one powerful graph. We'll wrap things up by learning how to decode the very sounds of the heartbeat.
First up, the rules of the game. Seriously, if you can get these 3 simple concepts down, pressure, valves, and timing, you'll have the key to understanding the entire cardiac cycle. It's that important. The single most crucial point to get is this. The cardiac cycle is all about pressure. Blood isn't sucked or pulled anywhere. Nope, it's always pushed from an area of higher pressure to an area of lower pressure. This one principle, right here, drives everything else we're about to talk about.
So, the cycle is split into 2 main parts. You've got systole, which is the contraction phase when the heart is actively pumping blood out. And then you have diastole, the relaxation phase when it's filling back up. At a pretty typical heart rate of 75 beats per minute, the whole cycle takes just 0.8 seconds. And what's kind of interesting is that the heart actually spends more time relaxing and filling in diastole than it does contracting and pumping in systole.
And that leads us to the golden rule of cardiac valves. The heart's 4 valves are basically just passive, one-way doors. They only swing open when the pressure behind them is greater than the pressure in front of them. That's it. This simple rule is absolutely critical, so keep it in mind.
All right, with those rules in mind, let's get to the main event. We're going to walk through a single heartbeat, phase by phase, focusing on the powerhouse of the heart, the left ventricle. This whole sequence is classically shown on what's known as the Wiggers Diagram.
Let's follow the journey. It all starts with atrial contraction. This is triggered by the P wave on an EKG, and it gives this final little squeeze. We call it the atrial kick that tops off the ventricles with the last 20% of their blood. Next up, isovolumetric contraction. The mitral valve slams shut, and that creates our first heart sound, S1, the classic lub. Now, picture this. Both the mitral and aortic valves are closed. The ventricle starts to squeeze, so the pressure inside the sealed chamber just skyrockets, but the volume doesn't change. That massive pressure forces the aortic valve open, leading to rapid ejection. Then, as the key wave signals the muscle to relax, ejection slows down. As the ventricle relaxes, its pressure plummets, causing the aortic valve to snap shut. This makes the second heart sound, S2, the dub, and kicks off isovolumetric relaxation. Once again, both valves are closed and the pressure just keeps falling. Finally, the mitral valve opens and we get rapid ventricular filling. This passive rush of blood can sometimes create a third heart sound, S3. This is usually normal in kids, but in an adult, it might suggest a problem. The cycle then winds down with reduced filling as the pressures start to equalize, getting everything ready for the next beat.
Okay, so we've got the mechanics down, but how do we actually measure how well the heart is doing its job? Well, that brings us to the heart's vital statistics. You really just need to know 3 key numbers. First is stroke volume, which is just the amount of blood pumped out with each beat, usually around 70 milliliters. Then there's cardiac output. That's the total volume pumped over a whole minute. You just multiply the stroke volume by your heart rate. And finally, we have ejection fraction. This is the percentage of blood that gets pumped out with each beat, and it's a super important measure of the heart's pumping efficiency.
So here's what a normal ejection fraction looks like. A healthy heart pushes out about 55 to 70% of the blood that was in it. When that number drops below 40%, it can be a huge red flag for systolic heart failure, which is a condition where the heart muscle just isn't contracting as strongly as it should.
So how does the body actually adjust all of this on a beat-to-beat basis? How does it, tune the engine? Well, it mainly uses 3 factors.
First, you've got preload and afterload. Preload is basically the stretch on the heart muscle right before it contracts. The bow and arrow analogy is perfect here. The more you stretch the muscle back, more preload, the more forcefully it's going to contract. Afterload, on the other hand, is the resistance the heart has to push against to get blood out. Think of trying to push open a really heavy door. The heavier the door, the harder you have to push. The third factor is contractility. This is the heart's raw horsepower, its intrinsic strength, totally independent of how much it's stretched.
Things like an adrenaline rush ramp up contractility, making the heart beat harder, while conditions like heart failure can unfortunately decrease it. Now, what's really cool is that we can see how preload, afterload, and contractility all play together across the entire cardiac cycle in a single, really elegant graph called the pressure-volume loop.
This graph literally plots the pressure versus the volume inside the left ventricle through one full beat. The four corners of the loop, those are the exact moments the valves open and close. The vertical lines brilliantly show those isovolumetric phases, where pressure changes like crazy, but the volume stays the same. The top curve is ejection, and the bottom is filling. It's literally the entire cardiac cycle in one picture.
And check this out. This is how our tuning factors change the loop shape. If you increase preload, the loop gets wider to the right, which means a bigger stroke volume. If you increase afterload, the loop gets taller and narrower, and your stroke volume goes down. And if you increase contractility, the heart empties more completely, so the loop shifts to the left and widens, increasing stroke volume.
Okay, last stop. Let's connect all this complex physiology to something a clinician can actually hear with a stethoscope. We're going to focus on that second heart sound, S2, the dub.
So that S2 sound is actually made of two sounds, the aortic valve closing, which we call A2, and the pulmonary valve closing, or P2. Now, normally, when you take a deep breath in, more blood returns to the right side of your heart. This makes the right ventricle take just a little bit longer to empty, which delays the P2 sound. So you briefly hear the two sounds split, A2, then P2. It's totally normal.
But, and this is really important, if that splitting pattern is weird, it can be a major clue to some underlying disease. A wide split, where P2 is always late, could point to a right bundle branch block. A fixed split that doesn't change at all when you breathe, that's a classic sign of a hole between the atria. And a paradoxical split, where the A2 is actually delayed past P2, suggests a big problem on the left side of the heart, like aortic stenosis.
Which really brings us to our final thought. Isn't it amazing how from the simple principle of pressure changes, we can get this beautiful visual signature with the PV loop and these audible clues from heart sounds that tell us such a profound story about the heart's health?
To really lock all this stuff in, we invite you to visit our website. We've got high-yield notes, a quick revision mind map, and a quiz on everything we covered today. The link is right there in the description below.